everyone. Well, we're up to our review session 2. And even though it's only our second lecture in this semester, well, it's lecture 3, but really as far as the course material, that is your second lecture. I'm sure a lot of you have got an appreciation of the speed of the material and how fast you need to really learn things, and that putting off reviewing and understanding time value of money until it's time for our first test is really not a good strategy, because you can see within this lecture what we have covered in lecture 2, time value of money. Essentially all of the components are appearing in that lecture. So dealing with present values, future values. I'm just wanting to emphasize that you need to really stay on top, because we're covering material very fast and we just don't want you to be left behind. At the same time, I mean, most of you, at least 2/3 of you guys, are doing all of this stuff on time in terms of the watching videos and doing online quizzes on campus. So this is all good. But if you're feeling that you are starting to get lost, please don't waste any time and let me know. Or if you have a friend group, study group, really get on top of everything. So we're talking about mortgage loan structuring. So this is, from this point on, this is really, we're going to be talking about financing of property. So the next few weeks we're going to be dedicating our time looking at residential side of property financing, and then when we come back from the break, we're looking at commercial properties and income-producing properties. So let's review mortgage loan structuring. But before that, let's just think about housing. And really, housing is the basic human need. It provides shelter. And regardless of what time period you're looking at, whether it's when New Zealand was just establishing or the current times, we all need shelter, whether it's immigration barracks in the 50s or workers' housing of early 1900s, and then the huge expansion of the housing market in the 1950s, and how in the post-World War II period, the government was really turning up their efforts in trying to increase home ownership in the country and providing special loans for first-time homeowners, and kind of making home ownership kind of an aspiration for all New Zealanders. And perhaps to these days, home ownership is something that a lot of the people aspire to. But as well as just providing you with the basic need of protecting you from the elements, housing is probably one of the biggest and most important investments that people will make in their lifetime. So therefore, I think it is kind of a long way around of telling you that understanding how property financing, residential property financing in particular, works is quite important, and it might touch you not just when you go and work in the industry, but also for your personal life and your decision. Being kind of equipped with the tools of how do you analyze residential property investment is quite useful. And property market in New Zealand, well, it is very dynamic, and it's constantly undergoing changes. And just last year, I was showing students in my class the February 2019 snapshot of house prices, and it basically showed that Auckland housing market has stalled. In fact, there was, house prices in Auckland didn't even keep up with inflation. So if you invested at that time period, perhaps you weren't really as well off as people who invested, say, a few years ago, say 2013, 2014, where we had our previous property boom. But then you look at today and look at that. Property prices in Auckland seem to have recovered, and they have gone up by over 4% in just 1 year. So clearly, monitoring how house price is going up and what drives these things is quite important. But then at the same time, things can change overnight. And right now, the whole world is gripped with dealing with coronavirus, and we can see how it's impacting markets worldwide, where all of our main stock markets have had enormous losses in just the last week. And looking at our New Zealand context, you know, our kind of main financial regulator, the Reserve Bank, they have cut our official cash rate to its lowest level, and now they decided not to go to zero. They still kept it positive. But that decision from the Reserve Bank has definitely had its implications on our local stock market, where we have lost over 8% in just one day. So all of this is going to play out and affect house prices as well. I mean, people are going to be making decisions with what do they do with their money when the prospects of their employment aren't very certain, and what's going to happen a year from now, even a month from now, nobody can really tell. So it's very hard to be making decisions in the current environment. But anyway, you still, you know, they'll say life goes on, and whether it takes several months, it might take a year or more to recover. I mean, housing is still going to be there, and we still need to find ways of financing properties and understanding the basics of residential financing. So really, if you break it down, residential loans, their main components of it is you need to know the loan amount. So this is how much you get at the very beginning. This is the present value of the loan. You need to know maturity date. So that is how many years is it going to take you to pay off your loan. Maturity and amortization. Well, in some cases, for example, your loan, what is amortization? Amortization is the process of paying off your loan. And most loans are set up so that they're going to be amortized fully by the time the loan matures. So loan maturity can be, say, 20 years, 25, 30 years. So it's quite a long-term period of time that is given to the homeowners to repay their loans. And so typically, by the time you reach the final year, your very last payment, you should completely amortize your loan, and that is the outstanding balance of your loan should equal to zero. But as you would have seen within the lecture, there are alternatives to just your standard fully amortized loan. You can choose where you partially amortize your loan, where if you compare present value to the outstanding loan amount, which is the future value, how much is left to repay. With a fully amortized loan, it's zero, the future value. With a partially amortized loan, that future value is still above zero, whether it's 100,000, 50,000, whatever it is you agree with your terms with your bank. But as long as future value is below the present value, it tells you that that loan, at least part of it, has been amortized. So the principal of that loan has reduced. You can have a zero amortization loan where you pay off absolutely no principal during the whole term of the loan. All you're doing is you're paying interest to the bank. And you can have a negatively amortized loan where not only you don't pay off any principal back to the bank, you don't even pay enough interest on that loan, and where all of that interest that you haven't paid is just added on top of your loan. And this is how, with a negatively amortized loan, the future value, the outstanding loan amount, is actually greater than what you started off with. So there is certainly, you need to understand the intricacies and differences between the amortization patterns of the loan and how that relates to maturity. Essentially, how much do you need to pay off at the end? That can vary from zero to quite large amounts. interest rate, well, there are lots of decisions about how do you choose an interest rate. And as a component of an interest rate, there is always expectations about how the market is going to change. And if you look at just these two tables at the bottom, banks set different interest rate depending on the term for how long you want to fix your interest rate. So for example, if you are buying a house in the US, they do have terms where you can fix your interest for a short period of time, but the most common way would probably be where you fix your interest rate for the duration of your loan until it matures. So you can fix your interest rate for 30 years if you like. But in New Zealand, the furthest we can go into the future in terms of fixing our interest rate is typically 5 years. I think some banks can go up to 7 years, but 5 years is usually the limit. It doesn't mean that we have to completely pay off our loan in 5 years' time. Your maturity can still be 20 or 30 years. It's just if you fix your interest rate for 5 years, that means after 5 years, you go to the bank and you're going to refix your interest rate at whatever interest rates are doing at that time. So if you're fixing it every 5 years during a 30-year term, you will renew your loan, refix your interest rate 5 times. But you don't have to go for 5 years. You can choose to fix it for as little as 6 months. And then after 6 months, make a decision, well, do I fix for another 6 months or do I fix for 5 years? Your risk, how you perceive the market and where it's going to go can change over a 6-month period. So if today you feel like, well, if you kind of keeping attention to what the markets are doing and what our kind of main financial instrument that kind of regulates interest rates, you might have heard of the official cash rate. So right now, as I said, in New Zealand, it's at its lowest level, 0.25. And since 2015, it has been going down. So if the Reserve Bank is cutting the official cash rate, it kind of is reflected in the interest rates that banks are offering for residential lending. And you can see that this is from a year ago. If you were going to fix your interest rate for 1 year, in February of 2019, you would have paid a rate of 4.55%, whereas if I am buying a house in February of 2020 and I want to fix my interest rate for 1 year, I pay 3.95. And you can see that the rates has been going down, so it's kind of market reacts to the overall lending environment and the overall prevalent interest rate. Whereas if you were, say, borrowing prior to 2015 when official cash rate was actually increasing, you might have made a decision, well, instead of only allowing if I know interest rates are going up, perhaps it's a good idea to fix more long-term rather than just fix it for a very little period of time. So there is a lot of decisions that you can make when you get into residential financing. And the anticipations of the market in terms of the interest rate risk, it certainly plays a role in that. So right now, if you're buying a house, you're going to think, well, I might just go with floating interest rate because if rates are going down, continue to go down, I might just wait. And because if you go on a variable rate, you can change your rate anytime. You can decide to fix it at any point in time. Whereas if you fix your interest rate today for 1 year, you cannot do anything to it until February or March 2021. And certainly, it depends on your risk profile of what is it that you want to do. So let's just, quick example. Let's say today you're buying a house and you went for the kind of middle of the market. It's just not in focus. Don't know why it doesn't want to focus for us. I don't know, if I try to write big, 850,000, that is the house you want to buy. And probably the biggest amount, well, the bank would be willing to lend you up to 90%. So their threshold is really 80%. And you can see that if you're putting towards buying the house more than 20%, certainly banks looking at you more favorably. So if you're putting in more of the equity into the house, you can pay a lower interest rate. Whereas if you put less equity, you pay higher interest rate. So let's say you're a first-time home buyer, you haven't really have enough savings and all you can afford, fleece your KiwiSaver and get help from your parents, and you could barely scrape around 85,000 as your deposit. So that means you're putting down 10% in equity, and you're getting a 90% loan-to-value ratio. So 90% of the purchase price will be financed by the loan. So this is a $765,000 loan that you're getting from the bank. Oh, that's getting better. That's better, a little bit. All right, so you need to get from the bank $665,000, and you're making a decision. Okay, one option for me is to fix it for 5 years. I just can't take any risk, and I just want to be certain that for the next 5 years, I'm going to be paying a rate of 4.19% for the next 5 years. Well, if you take a present value of $765 and put your interest rate, and let's say you decided to go with a rate maturity of 30 years. So that's your 30 years, and you're going to make 12 payments per year. So put all of that into the calculator. You end up with a payment of $3,736.52. So that's how much you would have to come up every month for the next 5 years to pay the rate of 4.19. If you decide to say fix for only 2 years, that's as long as you want to fix your interest rates, you can get a rate of 3.89%. So at a rate of 3.89%, everything else the same, 30 years, 12 payments per year, you're looking at payments of $3,603.88. So it's not the most significant difference, really. If you go with the low interest rate and fixing your payments for 2 years, you save around $132.64. So there's 2 ways to look at this difference. One is you're saving these $132 if you go with a 2% interest rate. At the same time, you can look at this $132 as a premium that you pay on a 5-year interest, on a 5-year fixed interest, as a way of guaranteeing that for the next 5 years, your interest rate will not change. So for somebody who is completely risk averse, they might say it's worth it for me for the next 5 years. So if you multiply this by 60, they might say, I'm quite happy to pay almost $8,000 extra just to have this certainty. Whereas on the flip coin, if it's a person who wants to fix it only for 2 years, they're saying, well, I'd rather say over the next 2 years, you're saving approximately $3,200. So for them, They look at it, well, I'd rather save this $3,200, and then at the end of 2 years, I'll make a decision on whether to fix for another 2 years, or maybe I'll fix it for another 5 years. So really, it depends on an individual. You can look at it in different ways. So what else do we need to know about loans? We've talked about interest rates. Payments. First of all, payments. What are the components of the payment? Payment is made up of, first of all, always is going to be going towards interest. So your payment, first of all, needs to cover interest on your loan. And whatever is left over from that payment goes towards repaying the principal. And depending on what pattern of payment you go, and I have it on the next slide actually, but you can go, there is table loan, there is reducing loan. So there is different ways of how principal and interest components can change over time. But remember that first and foremost, the bank is going to charge interest on the loan, and only if there is anything left over, it will go towards reducing your principal amount. How often you choose to pay your loan? Of course, the more often you repay your loan, the less you need to pay over time. The less interest, I would say. You still repay the same principal amount. If you have an $100,000 loan, if you increase the frequency of the payments, you just reduce the amount of interest that you have to pay during that time. But over time, you're still repaying the same $800,000. And how you're amortizing, whether it's, you're going to have the highest level of payment if you want to fully amortize your loan, because it has to have enough principal repayment built into it in order to repay and fully amortize it over, say, 30 years. It then goes on a sliding scale from that. If you have a partially amortizing loan, within your payments, you have enough to pay your interest, and some of it will go towards repaying principal, but still not enough to pay it off completely during the term of the loan. So the loan payment will be slightly smaller than with the fully amortized. Even smaller payment will be with an interest-only loan, and with a negatively amortized loan, that will be the smallest amount of payment. But all that means is if you're choosing something less than a fully amortized loan, all you're doing is you're making a decision to defer the paying until the end of, say, 30 years, if that is the maturity of your loan. Because what it's really going to hit you is at the end, yes? So if you have an interest-only loan, for 30 years, you've been doing nothing other than paying off interest. And that means if you borrowed $800,000 30 years ago, well, today, you have to come up with that $800,000 to repay back to your bank. Whereas if you would have chosen a fully amortized loan, well, you would have repaid it all over time. You kind of, how you want to spread the pain. Either you want to take this pain over time, it's not going to be as painful, but still a little bit painful. Or you just want to postpone all of the pain and just swallow it all at the end. Again, it's all personal preference. So where does your payment go? Well, as I said, first of all, interest. Anything remaining goes to principal, not the other way around. So how do you design your payment? How do you want to repay your loan? Well, the most conventional way of repaying your loan is using a table loan, table repayments, and that is you want to keep the level of the payment constant. It's the flat line. You know that for the next 2 years, for example, if I'm fixing my interest rate for 2 years, 24 payments are going to be always the same. $3,603 we've calculated before. The amount of principal and interest, the ratio is going to change during that 24-month period. The highest amount of interest is going to be in the first month, and then as I pay off the principal, of course I have to pay less and less interest, and so more of my payment can go towards repaying that principal and less interest taken out from that payment. You can choose so-called reducing loan, reducing payments. And that is where the thing that is constant is that you know that every single payment repays, say, $1,000 from the principal amount of your loan. So with this type of loan, say if you've agreed, you pay off $1,000 every month. You started off with $800,000. That means next month your loan balance is $799,000. And every month it reduces by $1,000. But your payment has to be recalculated every month because as your loan balance goes down, you are going to pay less interest. So if in the very first month I had to pay interest on the full amount of $800,000, in the second month I now have to pay interest on $799,000. So that $1,000 always stays constant, but interest is going to reduce. And so that means the payment is going to be reducing, overall payment is going to be reducing as well. Balance before maturity, that really depends on your amortization pattern, and you can either have balance of 0, and that is a fully amortized loan. You can have a case where present value equals future value, that is your interest-only loan. Or you can have a present value smaller than future value, that is a negatively amortized. So all of that is just telling you of how much loan is paid off during the term. So with a fully amortized loan, you pay off the whole amount by the time it matures. So essentially, in this course, you're kind of equipped with all of these tools to understand all of the differences in the way you amortize in loans, the way you choose interest rates, how you want to repay, what payments do you want to fix the payment, do you want to fix the principal amount. There's a lot of decisions that you can make, and of course the more you know about it, the better decisions you can make. Finally, about the pay and accrual rates, again, this really ties back to the level of amortization. Pay rate is the ratio between the loan repayment and the loan balance, initial loan amount. An accrual rate is the rate at which your interest is calculated. And that's just an accrual rate is you take your nominal interest rate and divide it by the frequency of your payments. Your pay rate is going to exceed accrual rate for loans that are either partially or fully amortized. Your pay rate is equal to accrual rate in an interest-only scenario, and a pay rate is lower than an accrual rate if it's a negatively amortized loan. So let's move on to some Kahoots. Okay. So most of you got the correct answer, but just let's look through them. So which is not true about amortizing loan. So we're assuming amortizing loan is the loan where you pay off the principal during the term of the loan. So you're coming to a future value that's either zero or at least less than present value. So you've paid off some principal. Therefore, the option, the red one, that they require repayment of principal and interest, that is absolutely true about amortizing loan. Otherwise, if it had no principal, it would have been amortized. Pay rate is greater than the accrual rate. That is a requirement for an amortizing loan, a loan where you pay off principal. So it is true for amortizing loan where you need to have your pay rate greater than the accrual rate. And repayments can be made with either fixed or variable interest rate. That is, of course, also really for any type of amortization. So that would be also true for positively amortizing loans. But whether the loan is repaid with the last payment or not, as I said, with partially amortizing loan, you don't have to have repaid all of your loan during the term of it. Some outstanding loan balance can remain at the end. So that's why the last one is not true, which you all guys got. So that's great. Well, I was expecting, well, this is actually very, very interesting. And this is why I bring up this question. It's very important that we get this right. So the outstanding loan balance, this is after you've made some payments, how much is still remaining to pay off. Let's say we have a positively amortizing loan, fully amortizing loan, in fact. So how do you find the outstanding loan balance? I'll just go to my document camera quickly. So let's say we have a $765,000 loan, and we fixed our interest rate for 2 years at 389, and then we're making these payments of $3,603. I want to know, after 12 months, what is my outstanding loan amount? Given that majority of you guys have chosen where you can find the total number of payments and subtract that from the original loan amount. This is what you guys are saying. I'm going to take 3,603 multiplied by 12, and then subtract this approximately 43,236. So this is how much I've paid to the bank over 12 months. And what that statement was saying, can I just take this 43,000 and subtract that from 765 to find how much I still have remaining to repay? So minus 765. 721,764 approximately. So this is my balance. This is what that blue column, this answer was saying. But you're forgetting about the most important thing I mentioned. When you're making a payment on the loan, the first thing that the bank is going to take out from that payment is what? Well, according to this answer, everything that you pay goes towards reducing the principal. Essentially, they're a charity, and they don't charge you interest. So with a 0% interest loan, that would be true. We would have paid $43,000, and all of it would have gone towards repayment of your principal. Well, since banks are not a charity, and they are going to charge you interest, and especially in the very first years of the loan, most of your payment is going to go towards repayment of interest, and very little goes towards chipping away at that original loan amount. So if you take your calculator, let's say we have that $765,000 for 30 years at a rate of 3.89. So that's our payment. Let's see after 12 months, what is that? $751,268. So in fact, after 12 months, what we have done is we've paid around $14,000. So out of this $43,000, $30,000 went towards paying interest, and only $14,000 or so went towards repaying principal. So no, you can never just take the original loan amount and just subtract all of the payments that you've made to date and find the outstanding loan amount. Always you have to deduct the interest from those payments, and only then you can find out how much actual principal you have paid. So be careful. This is always something that comes up on the test, and some students might still trip up on that. So again, very interesting. So I guess you may have not paid attention to the little detail of remaining balance applied to interest, the remaining balance of the payment. So it needs to be switched around, where when you make a payment towards your home loan, as I said, first thing you have to pay the full amount of interest, and only what's left goes towards reducing that loan balance. Yes, so not the other way around. Remaining balance goes towards repayment of principal. So, yes, it's just kind of a technical question. Where do you use, if you ever wanted to find out how much of your payment actually goes towards reducing the loan balance or repayment of principal and how much towards interest, you need an amortization schedule. And in your slides, you would have seen something like this. So this is an amortization schedule. All it is just, it analyzes every single payment, and it shows how you are repaying, how much interest, how much is amortized, and what is the balance. So you can see here in the amortization schedule for the balance, it's only the amount of amortization that is applied to finding out how much is left over. All right, let's look at these key words in here. We have repayment of principal. So a loan type where the repayment of principal remains constant. So that is the example where it said, let's assume you're going to pay off $1,000 every month. It goes every time you make a payment, $1,000 is taken off your loan balance. So that amount is fixed. It's always constant. And therefore, to calculate the total payment, you need to know what is the loan balance, calculate the interest, add it on top of that $1,000, and as you pay off your balance, less and less interest needs to be paid. So that means your payment pattern is reducing. So in these answers here, table loan and constant payment loan, these are the same things. This is the type of payment where the total payment is fixed. It doesn't change, say, for 2 years or 5 years, however long you fix your interest rate. But with reducing loan, your payment is going to, every month, if that's the frequency of your payments, every month it has to be recalculated. Wow, almost evenly split. It's so interesting. So let's, constant payment loan. So just quickly go back to drawing. What is a constant payment loan? So if this time, this is payment. Constant payment, it does not change, so it's fixed. Within the payment, there is going to be interest, and there is principal. So we need to figure out how much principal is going to be paid over time. Well, if we are fully amortizing our loan, we're going to be paying, at first, our loan balance is going to be high, so we're going to pay a lot of interest and very little principal. But as we reduce that outstanding loan amount, we have to pay less and less interest, and more principal then can then direct it towards repaying that loan. So in here then, share of the regular payment that goes to the principal, that is here, increases every month. So that is true. it's good to see. Present value of the annuity is the present value of the loan. And what is present value of an annuity? An annuity are regular payments, but all you're doing is you project payments into the future. And if you want to bring them back into the present value, all you're doing is you're removing the interest from those payments. And this is what a regular loan payment is. It's principal and interest. So by bringing it back to the present value of the loan, you're removing that interest component and just you're left with the principal amount with the present value. And this works the same as an annuity. And we have just our last, but we have a screen that's on fire. So just think this is an interest-only loan. And pay rate for an interest-only loan. So pay rate and interest-only loan, for them, whether it's a pay rate equals to the accrual rate, and accrual rate is the ratio between your nominal interest rate and the frequency of payment. So if you take your 12% interest rate, which is 0.12, and divide it by 12, you get 0.01. So this is the end of our Kahoot. And who is the winner here? We have we're going to do something special.